Hey there. It's been a little bit since I've put a video out. There are a number of reasons for that. One of which is that there is construction happening in my house right now, which means that it's hard to find the time to record without the sound of drilling or hammering or whining saws or whatever else is going on upstairs cutting into the mix. I wish that were a better excuse than it was, but honestly, I have 3 or 4 active in-progress video projects that, for whatever reason, I haven't finished yet. Some of those are in the process of being edited as scripts. Some of them are in the process of being curated for images. This is not a scripted video. You can probably tell by the rambling introduction. I just kind of wanted to put a quick video out about this because I was thinking about it while I was playing it. The footage you're watching right now is footage of me using a handheld called the Odin. If you're interested in it, it's an Android-powered handheld gaming device. There's lots of YouTubers who've done better videos than I could possibly do about this device. It's available through Indiegogo. It's AYN Odin. Mine's actually a little broken right now. The shoulder button R1 is not working, so I'm using the triggers for shoulder buttons instead in games like what you're seeing now. This is Super Metroid, a classic Super Nintendo game. I've played it many times, though to the best of my recollection, I've never actually beaten it. Super Metroid is these days pretty notorious as a game that did not hold your hand. The Metroid series in general goes up and down on this. Metroid Fusion, which was always my favorite and most played Game Boy Advance game, is very hand-holdy and linear, whereas a game like Super Metroid rarely tells you explicitly where to go and lets you rely on environmental cues or just a sense of exploration to get around. And you can see how that plays out when you see me failing to figure out where it is I'm supposed to go and trying to shoot walls and ceilings and floors and bomb everything until a pathway emerges. A couple of things, though, about how I'm playing this game. First of all, as I mentioned, I'm playing it on an Android-powered handheld. Android is typically a phone operating system. In this case, it's been repurposed for the use of the various emulators and gaming platforms that have been built in the software for Android. This is running on RetroArch, which is a multi-platform, multi-emulator hub. The code for the emulators comes from other developers and gets integrated into RetroArch. I think there are some mixed feelings about RetroArch in the greater emulation community. I don't want to get into that now. The reason I'm using RetroArch is because it is the only way I think you can do right now to get the BSNES HD core or emulator onto an Android device. BSNES HD is a fork or a variation on an emulator called BSNES, which was designed first and foremost for accuracy in emulating Super Nintendo. But the HD version adds some, as you might expect from the name, HD quality of life improvements that let you play games in a way that wouldn't have been even theoretically possible on the hardware of the time, both in terms of the console hardware and the television hardware. So the main thing that BSNES implemented is widescreen support and high-definition Mode 7. So let's start with the second one first. Mode 7 is how games like Mario Kart and F-Zero render graphics. The high-definition version basically means that on a large HD monitor, the pixelation of the backgrounds and other faux 3D effects in those games become much higher resolution. It becomes a lot clearer. It's very impressive, especially if you can run it at the particularly high resolutions. Things like the overworld map in Link to the Past also uses this mechanism. But the first thing I'm more interested in, and that's widescreen support. There's also a Sega Genesis emulator that supports widescreen, but for me, what attracted me to BSNES was first the Super Mario World widescreen patch developed by a user on GitHub. I'm showing that on the screen now. The issue with turning these games into widescreen is that the rendering of objects in the screen, particularly monsters and projectiles and other sprites, was not done with the knowledge of a 16:9 aspect ratio. So you have these areas on the left and right of the screen where things just don't render. The Super Mario World patch does an amazing job of correcting that. It uses, from the description in GitHub I gather, it uses the panning tool. If you hit the right and left shoulder in Super Mario World, it would usually pan the screen to the left or right, which means that the game is actually rendering objects about 2 times the distance from the visible view. So basically the patch removes the panning feature and it uses that view as part of the visible plane of view. It's very cool, very impressive, and the end result is you get what looks like a native widescreen patch for a game made in 1991. I'm using a widescreen patch here as well as some other patches for Super Metroid to enhance the control scheme, to bring it more in line with later games in the series, and to patch a couple other quality of life things in. It's not as effective as the Super Mario World patch. Objects that don't render within the normal field of view just don't render, so you get stuff clipping in. There's a second hack I'm using within the emulator to fix this, but it causes other weird issues. And this game has some weird issues with maps where there's just space that was not meant to be visible because of more vertical maps or because of things set side by side. There are certain secrets that you can basically see when you're not supposed to in this view because the widescreen allows you to see through secret passages. And all this made me think about what I was talking about in the previous video I made about The Legend of Zelda for Game Boy: Link's Awakening. A remake or HD upscale or whatever you want to call it of an old game is trying to do this weird balancing act of being loyal to the design aesthetics and the gameplay experience of the original game while also providing the quality of life and user friendliness and visual fidelity that we've come to expect as people who play video games on very large 1080p or 4K television screens. These emulators do this in a way that lets you choose what that balance is going to be. So in this case, I've decided that I can live with some of the wonkiness here in order to get this widescreen picture. You can see the frames per second counter in the top right. Ordinarily, this game should run at a locked 60 frames per second. I'm getting an average of around 55 to 57 when I play this game, and that causes some weird slight slowdown in gameplay, especially in bosses or other object-dense rooms or areas. But I'm okay with that. I'm much more okay with it here than I am when I'm experiencing it in the Switch remake of the game. And that's because my baseline expectations are different here. This is a user-guided, user-chosen experience, and having the ability to choose those things changes your appreciation or annoyance with those things. If I had an option when I was playing Link's Awakening on the Switch to switch it to, say, a locked 30 instead of a variable frame rate with stutter, I probably would have done that. Or if I had an option to reduce visual fidelity and maintain 60 frames per second, I probably would do that too. So I might in the future turn to emulation for that, because emulation gives you this option. And once you have the option, once you have the control as the user, the relationship you have with the game changes. You become sort of a tailor of your own experience. I always try these patches and things like this anytime I get a new handheld device like the Odin. I've had other Android handhelds, Raspberry Pi devices, things like that. And I love seeing how you can push the limits of some of these things, whether it's upscaling or control scheme changes. Anyway, I got into a lot of this already in both the emulation video and the Link's Awakening video. I will never stop finding this stuff fascinating and like pushing the limits of what you can do. And what I really wanted to emphasize here is what I can do here is not ideal. There are stutters, it's not perfect. If I tried to play a GameCube game on this, some of them might run perfectly, many of them would not, especially if I tried to do what I'm doing here and create a widescreen experience. So the fact that that doesn't bother me, or probably wouldn't bother me if I put in the effort, tells you a lot about the difference between when a developer tries to tell you how an HD remake should work versus you curating an HD version of a game. And I'm going to link also to a really quick video by Retro Game Core, which is a really nice channel, talking about how he just did on his PC handheld gaming device basically an HD remake of Metroid Prime. It's not really a remake, it's just applying a bunch of community patches and HD textures, and all of a sudden the game looks like a game you might play on the Switch come a year or two's time. I think that's very cool, and when you do that yourself, you, I think, feel an ownership and a pride in what you've built. It reminds me of Warhammer 40k figurines, which I assemble and paint when I have the time. And I'm not good at it, but that doesn't matter. I'm really proud of the ones that I've made. More on that hopefully in another video someday. There is something to be said for owning the parameters of the experience. Companies like Nintendo try so hard to control the experience, and it's to their detriment as much as to ours. It means we don't get to play all of the games we want to play. I really wanted to play Mario Party on the N64 with my friends a couple weekends ago, but they just haven't bothered to release that on their service that you have to pay a significant amount for. Even though the game has been perfectly easy to emulate for many years, these games all look pretty bad and pixelated on the Switch, even though it could very easily handle at least gentle upscaling of the graphics. It just hurts your memory of these games. Whereas if I'm playing a version of the game that I've decided I can handle, that's as upscaled and tweaked as I want it to be, it might not be like the game I played before, but it's still my experience, and it's still personalized to me in a way that makes it feel more like I can own it than with something like Nintendo's online service. Anyway, this was meant to be a quick video, and I rambled on a little longer than I meant to. Hopefully I can edit this down into a reasonable length. Thank you for watching. I promise I'll have some real videos at some point in the future. In the meantime, like, subscribe, comment, tweet, engage, obey, etc. See you later. Bye.